Many of you might feel rather stir-crazy because of the fact of you are being confined. I remember just a week ago, people said you could go out, walk and hike, and my gosh, there are cars up and down Crenshaw Boulevard, people going to the hiking trails. Well, there's so many people that they had to close that, so we're back to where we were before. But if you think this is difficult, imagine the people of Israel when they were exiled into Babylon. Their city had been destroyed, the temple was ruined, and here they were way to the east, feeling really dead. And it is in that context that we hear the words of the prophet Ezekiel. The book of Ezekiel is the only one of the prophetic books that was written totally in exile. He wrote it from Babylon. And in today's reading, he knew the people felt bereft. They felt that God was not there. He had been back in Jerusalem. The temple was destroyed. But his words were to give them hope. And so the image he has were of dead bones. That these one day will come to life again. And then the relationship would be restored. So in a sense, it was telling those people feeling so abandoned, so alone in exile, that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. There is hope. I don't know how long this our exile will be, how many weeks or months, I just don't know. But imagine the people of Israel experienced it for over 40 years. An entire generation came by without knowing it. But they eventually returned. A new temple was built, and things got restored. But the message was God had not abandoned him. In fact, it wasn't that he was only in the temple in Jerusalem. God went into exile with them, and he was with them. He's saying, you're never alone. If you look behind me and see the crucifix, you might notice that it's covered now. And the reason why it is covered is because we're entering into Passion time. Up until now, Jesus' ministry had been in Galilee, sometimes in Samaria. It was a safe area. Jerusalem was not. Not only was the central center of the religion, that's where the temple was, but it was also where all the intrigue was and where Jesus' presence was the greatest threat. And so when he did perform acts of mercy, acts of kindness and miracles, he did it kind of in a hidden way. He would do it and then just kind of disappear. Hence, the veil over the crucifix. It will remain that way until Good Friday when it is unveiled. In today's reading, in a sense, we're beginning the march to Calvary. Ironically, it was because Jesus had heard that his good friend Lazarus was sick. And as we know, he didn't jump up right away, I've got to take care of him. He waited a few days. In fact, by the time he arrived, Lazarus was dead. A couple questions come to mind is, who was this Lazarus? And why was he such a good friend of Jesus? And why did Jesus decide to risk himself for Lazarus? Well, we don't know all the story about Lazarus. There's a lot hidden in the Gospel of John. One of the things that is a curious item is they talk about the house of Martha and Mary and her brother Lazarus. Well, ordinarily in this society, it'd be the house of Lazarus because the male was the one that got all the family property. But he doesn't say that. Now, the Jesuit Father James Martin, in a reflection yesterday, in fact, he suggests that perhaps Lazarus was a special need person. We don't know. But we do know from this is that he had a special relationship with Jesus, and Jesus was willing to risk his life to save the life of Lazarus. And that's what we heard in today's reading. He intentionally waited so that people would know that it wasn't just he got really ill and finally he cured him like he'd done in the past. No, he came 4 days later, and it was very clear that he was dead. Even Lazarus' sister said, "Lord, you don't want to roll away that stone, it's going to stink." But so he did. And in the very action of it, what does Jesus say? He says, "Lazarus, go forth." Now, when they describe what took place, this is John's gospel, it's an interesting comparison to what was to take place in a tomb just a few weeks later. Lazarus arose from the tomb with his head bound. You can almost see him moving very steadily like this because he was all wrapped up in the burial cloth. And Jesus said, "Unwrap him and set him free." Later on Easter Sunday, we see something different. When they came to the grave, there was no Jesus there. There were the burial cloths that were set aside. Lazarus brought the burial cloths with him because he was going to need it later on. He was eventually going to die, as all of us are. But when Jesus rose from the dead, his body was glorified. There was no more need of a burial cloth. Lazarus, in a sense, was given a second chance. Perhaps that experience made him examine his own life and say things that I need to do differently that I wasn't doing before. And what I suggest to all of us today is, as we are going through this plague that has beset us, perhaps it gives us an opportunity to look at our own lives. What are the things that I need to do differently? How have I been given a new lease of life as Lazarus has? And realize that this miracle of Lazarus was preparing himself for a greater event. And that is the resurrection of the body. Jesus said in today's gospel, "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, even if he dies, will live." He has enabled us to experience a new life that is awaiting us. There was a story that a Protestant minister recounted about one of his flock, a woman who was dying of cancer. And as she was probably within a few weeks of death, she said to her pastor, she says, "You know, when I die, I want you to put a fork in my right hand." And he thought, that's kind of an unusual request. And so he says, "Well, let me explain. You know, when I was growing up, I went to a lot of events in our church. We'd have these dinners and everything, and my mother used to tell me when they would take away the food from the main course, save the fork because something better is coming." And of course I did, and then all of a sudden they would serve maybe some chocolate velvet cake or apple pie a la mode. And then I would get a chance to really enjoy that dessert. One thing that I really realize even now is that because of Jesus, there is something even greater awaiting me. And that fork reminds me of the dessert that is to come. And so she was able to face death bravely and confidently as a person of faith. And she wanted that fork to remind others as they mourn over her passage, not to mourn for her, but to remember that there is a much greater life to come. A life that awaited Lazarus even as he was resuscitated from the dead, and a life that awaits us as well.